The complete history of Yugoloths is not a tale of heroes or victims, but of creatures who turned war itself into profit and suffering into art. Long before mortals knew their names, these fiends moved through the shadows of the lower planes, manipulating demons and devils alike, ensuring the blood war would rage forever. They were born from mystery, shaped by betrayal, and perfected through countless millennia of calculated cruelty. No lord commanded them, no god claimed them. They served only contract and coin, yet their influence reshaped the multiverse in ways even angels could not undo. But one question haunts the oldest archives and the deepest vaults of Gehenna. If the Yugoloths exist only to profit from endless war, who benefits when the war was theirs to begin with? The earliest records speak of the Blood War as if it had always existed, a cosmic constant predating mortal memory and perhaps predating mortal existence itself. Demons and devils clashed across the abyss and the 9 hells in battles that reshaped reality with every stroke, their hatred for one another eclipsing even their contempt for the heavens above. But between these poles of chaotic evil and lawful evil lay territories of pure neutrality twisted into malevolence, planes where evil existed without the decorative philosophy of order or the raging passion of chaos. Gehenna and the Grey Waste formed the spiritual and geographical center of this neutrality, volcanic slopes and ashen wastelands that devoured hope and ambition alike. These were the first domains of the Yugoloths, though whether they claimed these realms or were spawned from them remained a question that would haunt planar scholars for millennia. The origin myths varied according to which ancient text one consulted and which faction of Yugoloths one interrogated, assuming they deigned to answer at all. The night hags of the Grey Waste whispered that they had created the Yugoloths in ages past, shaping them from larvae and dark magic in grotesque forges beneath Oinus. These crones, themselves creatures of calculated malice, claimed to have sought the perfect mercenary, a being uncorrupted by loyalty or passion, capable of serving any master for the right price. In their telling, the Yugoloths were tools that gained sentience and then independence, escaping their creators to establish their own hierarchies across the gloom. Other sources suggested far darker parentage, hinting at primordial fiends or forgotten powers that experimented with the essence of evil itself, attempting to distill its purest form, free from the constraints of alignment's extremes. These experiments, conducted in hidden laboratories on planes that no longer existed or in demi-planes sealed away from discovery, allegedly produced the first Ultraloths and Arcanoloths, beings of terrible intelligence who understood magic and manipulation with instinctive precision. A third myth, whispered among the oldest Batezu and Tanari, proposed that the Yugoloths predated both devil and demon, that they were the original fiends from whom all others descended. This theory held that when the cosmic schism split evil into law and chaos, the Yugoloths alone retained their neutrality, refusing to choose sides even as reality itself polarized around them. They became the memory of what evil had been before it fragmented, a living record of malevolence in its unified state. The Yugoloths themselves never confirmed or denied these origin stories. When questioned, they responded with misdirection or silence, understanding that mystery enhanced their value and that truth, once given freely, could never be sold again. Regardless of their genesis, the Yugoloths emerged into planar awareness as creatures defined by singular purpose. They existed to profit from conflict, to sell their services to the highest bidder, and to ensure that war never ended because peace would render them obsolete. Their hierarchy reflected this mercenary philosophy with rigid precision. At the apex sat the Ultraloths, massive beings whose forearms could wield weapons and magic simultaneously, creatures whose intellect rivaled that of archdevils and demon lords, but who applied that intellect solely to the science of warfare and the economics of bloodshed. Below them marched the Mezzoloths, insectoid soldiers whose chitin armor and trident arms made them ideal shock troops, utterly loyal to contract if not to cause. The Yugoloths spread wings of tattered membrane and wielded greatswords with supernatural skill. Serving as elite warriors and commanders, the Arcanoloths, most feared among the common ranks, devoted themselves to scholarship and sorcery, maintaining the Tower Arcane and the great contracts that bound Yugoloth society to its principles. The lowest castes included the Durgoloths, who served as beasts of burden and siege weapons, and the Hydroloths, aquatic horrors who patrolled the river Styx and other planar waterways. Even these lesser forms possessed cunning beyond their station, for no Yugoloth was truly mindless, and every member of the race understood that individual advancement came through service, excellence, and strategic betrayal in equal measure. The larvae from which Yugoloths were sometimes formed, the petitioners of the Grey Waste who had lived lives of apathy and selfish neutrality, provided raw material for transformation. The process by which larvae became Yugoloth involved rituals known only to the Arcanoloths and Ultraloths, ceremonies conducted in hidden chambers where the screaming never reached outside walls. The establishment of Kinoin marked the first great political achievement of Yugoloth civilization. This obsidian tower rose from the slopes of Kalas, the second mount of Gehenna, a structure so massive that its foundations pierced through multiple layers of reality, and its highest spires vanished into toxic clouds that killed any mortal who breathed them. Within Kinoin, the general of Gehenna held court, a being whose title changed hands through assassination and contract more than any formal succession. The general commanded the Yugoloth armies, negotiated the greatest contracts with devils and demons alike, and maintained the fiction of Yugoloth unity even as every Arcanoloth and Ultraloth schemed to replace him. The throne room of Kinoen became the center of Yugoloth power, a place where deals worth entire worlds were struck and where betrayals were executed with the precision of surgical strikes. The general's court included the Council of Generals, lesser Yugoloths who had distinguished themselves through military achievement or commercial success. These councillors advised the general, administered the great contracts, and positioned themselves for eventual ascension. Assassination attempts against the general occurred with such regularity that they became almost ceremonial, expected demonstrations of ambition that the general survived or did not. When a general fell, the tower itself seemed to recognize the shift, its architecture rearranging to reflect new management. The Oinoloth, as some texts named the general, served as the public face of Yugoloth interests, the being who met with pit fiends and ballas to negotiate deployments and prices. Behind this role, however, lay networks of intrigue so complex that even the participants could not trace all the threads. The Yugoloths approached the blood war not as participants but as facilitators and profiteers. They sold their services to both sides with complete transparency about their mercenary nature, never pretending to loyalty they did not possess. A legion of Medzaloths might fight for the devils in one campaign and for the demons in the next, their only constant being the quality of their service and the precision with which they fulfilled contract terms. This mercenary status granted them unique privileges across the lower planes. Devil lords allowed Yugoloth forces to march through the Nine Hells without interference, recognizing that today's employees might be tomorrow's allies and that alienating the Yugoloths would only drive them to offer better terms to the Abyss. Demon princes, despite their chaotic nature, honored Yugoloth contracts because breaking such agreements brought swift and terrible retaliation, not from the offended Yugoloths alone but from their entire race, who understood that reputation was their only true currency. The Yugoloths maintained fortresses and way stations across Gehenna and the Grey Waste, establishing a network of strongholds that served military and commercial functions simultaneously. On the slopes of Mungoth, Chamada, and the other furnaces of Gehenna, they built keeps that processed souls, trained larvae, and manufactured the weapons of planar war. The Grey Waste provided different resources, despair, apathy, and the unique form of nihilistic evil that characterized Hades and its layers. Yugoloth presence on Oinos, Niflheim, and Pluton turned these desolate realms into recruitment grounds where they gathered larvae and bargained with night hags for raw materials. The hags, whether they had truly created the Yugoloths or merely claimed credit for that genesis, maintained complex relationships with their supposed children, relationships marked by mutual exploitation and grudging respect. The first great Yugoloth migration occurred when entire armies relocated from Gehenna to establish permanent bases in the deeper reaches of the Grey Waste. This movement reflected strategic calculation rather than demographic pressure. The Yugoloths recognized that controlling both Gehenna and significant portions of the Grey Waste positioned them at the geographic and metaphysical center of lower planar politics. From these bases, they could deploy forces to the Nine Hells, or the Abyss, with equal speed, and they could intercept travelers, souls, and resources moving through the neutral territories. The migration also served internal political purposes, allowing ambitious Ultraloths to establish independent power bases away from Kinoin's direct oversight. These satellite fortresses swore allegiance to the general but operated with considerable autonomy, creating a distributed power structure that made Yugoloth civilization remarkably resilient to decapitation strikes. The Arcanoloths established the Tower Arcane during this period, a mobile demiplane that manifested across multiple locations simultaneously, existing partially on Gehenna, partially in the Grey Waste, and partially in hidden dimensional pockets, known only to its residents. Within the Tower Arcane, the Arcanoloths collected knowledge with obsessive fervor. They gathered spell formulas, planar maps, true names, and contracts, building libraries that rivaled those of the greatest archdevils. The tower served as Yugoloth University, archive, and intelligence headquarters. Young Arcanoloths studied there, learning the languages of all planes, the mechanics of planar travel, and the subtle arts of contract law that made Yugoloth agreements simultaneously airtight and exploitable. The eldest Arcanoloths, beings who remembered the first Blood War battles, maintained vaults deep within the tower where they stored secrets too dangerous or valuable to share even with other Yugoloths. The contracts themselves became Yugoloth art form and sacred text. Every agreement was inscribed in blood on materials that could survive planar catastrophe. Demon hide, devil scale, forged metal from Gehenna's volcanoes. The language used in these contracts drew from multiple planar dialects, incorporating fail-safes and contingencies that anticipated every possible violation or interpretation. An Arcanoloth might spend centuries drafting a single major contract, consulting precedents that stretched back to the earliest Yugoloth dealings. These contracts specified not only payment and service, but also rules of engagement, duration, withdrawal conditions, and the exact nature of retaliation should either party violate terms. The precision of Yugoloth contracts made them instruments of power in themselves. Possession of a contract gave one leverage over the parties involved, and the Arcanoloths maintained a registry of every significant agreement, using this knowledge to manipulate planar politics with surgical precision. Payment for Yugoloth services took many forms. Souls represented the most common currency, particularly those of evil mortals whose essence could be processed into larvae or consumed for power. The Yugoloths accepted souls from devils and demons alike, maintaining soul processing facilities across their territories. Gold and treasure meant little to them, except as instruments for corrupting mortals, but they accepted such payments when dealing with mortal summoners. True names held particular value, for knowledge of a being's true name granted power over that being, and Yugoloths collected such names with the dedication of bibliophiles collecting rare texts, magical items, spell formulas, planar secrets, and political favors all served as acceptable payment. The most valuable currency, however, was future obligation. A demon lord who could not pay for current services might agree to a contract stipulating that the debt would be called when the Yugoloths chose, on terms they would specify later. These open-ended obligations gave Yugoloths tremendous leverage, allowing them to call in debts at strategically perfect moments. The first major betrayal that defined Yugoloth reputation occurred during the siege of Avernus, when a Yugoloth army contracted to defend a devil fortress suddenly withdrew at the battle's climax, leaving their employers to face a demon horde alone. The devils fell, their fortress collapsed, and thousands of Batezu were destroyed. When the devils' surviving commanders demanded explanation, the Yugoloths produced their contract and noted that the agreement specified defense for a particular duration. That duration had expired precisely when the withdrawal occurred. The devils had failed to negotiate an extension, assuming that continued combat was implied. The Yugoloths demonstrated, with cold precision, that assumption had no place in formal agreements. They offered to return and complete the defense if the devils signed a new contract with appropriately increased rates. The devils, enraged but desperate, agreed. The Yugoloths returned, crushed the demons with brutal efficiency, collected their enhanced payment, and departed. The incident became legend across the lower plains, a cautionary tale about the absolute literal nature of Yugoloth contracts. This betrayal, like all Yugoloth betrayals, served a larger purpose. It reminded all potential clients that Yugoloths were not allies but employees, that they would fulfill contract terms exactly but never exceed them from goodwill or loyalty. The message resonated through the Blood War's command structures. Devil Lords began employing entire staffs of contract specialists to review Yugoloth agreements before signing. Demon princes, less inclined to such tedious review, suffered repeated betrayals when Yugoloth forces interpreted ambiguous contract language in ways that maximized Yugoloth advantage. These betrayals, always technically legal under the contract's exact wording, enhanced Yugoloth reputation for cunning while demonstrating that hiring Yugoloths required intelligence and precision. The stupid and careless received exactly what they paid for and nothing more. The Yugoloths engineered conflicts with the deliberate intent of ensuring perpetual employment. When battles threatened to reach conclusive outcomes, Yugoloth forces withdrew or subtly undermined one side to prolong the conflict. They leaked intelligence to both devils and demons, ensuring that neither side gained decisive advantage. They assassinated generals who seemed capable of ending stalemates. They introduced new weapons and tactics to whichever side was losing, then sold countermeasures to the other side once balance had been restored. This manipulation occurred across centuries, a slow-motion chess game played with armies as pieces and entire planes as the board. The Yugoloths understood that the Blood War's continuation was essential to their prosperity, and they devoted considerable resources to maintaining the conflict's equilibrium. Some historians theorize that the Yugoloths had started the Blood War itself, that the ancient enmity between devils and demons was Yugoloth creation rather than cosmic inevitability. The evidence for this theory remained circumstantial but compelling. The earliest Yugoloth contracts predated most written records of the Blood War, suggesting they had positioned themselves as mercenaries before the conflict fully ignited. Certain Yugoloth texts, fragments recovered from destroyed fortresses, contained references to the Great Work and the Eternal Commission, phrases that implied Yugoloth involvement in engineering a perpetual conflict. The Yugoloths neither confirmed nor denied these theories, recognizing that being credited with starting the multiverse's longest war enhanced their mystique, while being unprovable meant they faced no direct consequences for the accusation. The rise of the Yugoloth, as a formal title rather than a mere nickname, occurred during what planar historians called the First Consolidation. Multiple Ultraloths had claimed the title of General of Gehenna simultaneously, each commanding different Yugoloth armies and negotiating separate contracts. This fragmentation weakened Yugoloth bargaining power and threatened to turn internal competition into open civil war. The crisis resolved when an Ultraloth known as Anthraxus seized control of Kinoin through a combination of military force, political maneuvering, and strategic assassination. Anthraxus declared himself Yugoloth, a title he claimed meant ultimate general in the oldest Yugoloth tongue. He established protocols for succession that theoretically stabilized Yugoloth leadership while maintaining the tradition of advancement through murder. Under these protocols, any Ultraloth who could kill the Yugoloth and hold Kinoin for a full year would be recognized as the new Yugoloth. This formalization of assassination turned coup attempts into something like legal procedure. Anthraxus ruled from Kinoin for thousands of years, a tenure that made him one of the longest-serving fiend lords across the lower plains. His longevity derived not from invulnerability, but from paranoia refined to an art form. He employed layers of defenses, magical wards, loyal Ultraloth guards, spies embedded in every potential rival's organization, and contracts that ensured multiple factions would defend him from assassination attempts. He also revolutionized Yugoloth contract law, standardizing terms and creating template agreements that could be customized for specific clients. These standardized contracts made Yugoloth services more accessible while ensuring that all agreements contained certain fundamental protections for Yugoloth interests. Anthraxus proved equally skilled at military strategy, personally leading Yugoloth armies in several major blood war campaigns that demonstrated the superiority of disciplined neutrality over passionate ideology. The plagues that swept through the lower plains during what became known as the pestilence centuries originated from Yugoloth laboratories. The Yugoloths had devoted considerable research to biological and magical weapons, recognizing that disease could demoralize armies and destabilize regions more efficiently than conventional warfare. They developed strains of plague that affected only demons or only devils, selling these weapons to whichever side offered better payment. Some plagues escaped containment, ravaging Yugoloth territories along with their intended targets. The Yugoloths responded by developing immunities and countermeasures, then selling these defenses at premium prices. The cycle of plague, immunity, new plague, and new immunity became a profitable business model that continued for centuries. Some of the diseases persisted in the lower plains long after their creators had moved on to other projects, becoming endemic hazards that travelers had to navigate. The most devastating plague created by Yugoloth research was the Red Death, a magical contagion that turned its victims inside out over the course of days while keeping them alive and conscious throughout the transformation. The Red Death spread through the abyss with horrifying speed, killing millions of demons before the demon lords organized a quarantine response. The Yugoloths sold the cure to multiple demon princes, each believing they had exclusive access to the remedy. When the princes discovered the deception, they united briefly in fury, launching a coordinated assault on Yugoloth positions across the Grey Waste. The Yugoloths retreated to fortified positions and weathered the assault, then negotiated a settlement that required the demons to pay for the damage their armies had inflicted on Yugoloth property. The audacity of demanding payment from attackers enraged the demon princes further. But Yugoloth contract law was clear. The demons had damaged Yugoloth facilities that had been neutral territory, and neutrality violations carried specific penalties outlined in ancient treaties. The demons paid, fuming, and the Yugoloths added the incident to their long list of successful manipulations. Yugoloth expansion beyond Gehenna and the Grey Waste occurred gradually as they established outposts on other lower plains. They built embassies in the Nine Hells, fortified compounds where they could meet with devil clients without traveling to Gehenna. These embassies operated under diplomatic immunity granted by Asmodeus himself, who recognized Yugoloth usefulness despite his distrust of their ultimate loyalties. In the abyss, Yugoloth presence took different form, as the chaotic nature of that plane made permanent structures difficult to maintain. Instead, Yugoloths established mobile camps and negotiated temporary bases with specific demon lords, agreements that lasted only as long as both parties found them useful. The Yugoloths also maintained presence on Carceri, the prison plane, where they operated as slavers and jailers, capturing escaped prisoners and selling them back to whoever wanted them contained. This work brought them into contact with the Demodans and Yugoloths, other fiends who inhabited Carceri, and the resulting territorial disputes added another layer to lower planar politics. The War of Ripe Flesh demonstrated Yugoloth manipulation at its finest. Two demon lords, Baphomet and Pale Knight, had been locked in a territorial dispute for centuries, their armies clashing repeatedly without decisive outcome. The Yugoloths approached both lords separately, offering to provide forces that would break the stalemate. Both lords agreed, each believing the Yugoloths would support them exclusively. The Yugoloths deployed armies to both sides, then orchestrated battles where their forces appeared to fight furiously, while actually inflicting minimal casualties on each other. The war continued for another century, draining both demon lords' resources, while Yugoloth casualties remained negligible. When the demon lords finally discovered the deception, the Yugoloths pointed to their contracts, which specified that they would provide military forces, not military victory. They had fulfilled their obligations exactly. The demon lords could not unite against the Yugoloths because they remained enemies of each other, each too weakened to pursue the mercenaries while still facing their primary rival. The spiritual technology of the Yugoloths centered on their relationship with evil as philosophy and force. Unlike devils who championed tyranny or demons who embodied destruction, Yugoloths represented evil as transaction. They believed that all beings acted from self-interest, and that morality was performance art, designed to obscure that fundamental truth. This philosophy made them uniquely equipped to navigate the lower planes politics. They felt no ideological compulsion to spread chaos or law, no divine mandate to corrupt or destroy. They simply pursued profit and power with single-minded focus, unencumbered by the philosophical baggage that motivated other fiends. This purity of purpose made them predictable in their unpredictability. One could always trust a Yugoloth to act in its own interest, which meant careful negotiation could align Yugoloth interests with one's own temporarily. The nature of Yugoloth magic reflected their neutral evil alignment. Their spells emphasized transportation, communication, and transformation rather than destruction or domination. Arcanoloths mastered teleportation magic that allowed them to move themselves and their armies across planes with minimal warning. They developed communication spells that could not be intercepted or traced, enabling them to coordinate operations across vast distances. Their transformation magic could alter appearance, species, or even fundamental nature, though such changes always served tactical purposes rather than artistic expression. The Yugoloths also pioneered contract magic, spells that bound signatories to agreement terms through metaphysical compulsion. These contract spells made Yugoloth agreements enforceable even against beings who might otherwise ignore their obligations, though the magic had limitations that skilled Arcanoloths learned to exploit. The larvae fields of Gehenna represented Yugoloth resource extraction at industrial scale. Across the volcanic slopes, the Yugoloths maintained enormous pens where they harvested larvae by the thousands. The larvae, sole remnants of mortals who had died in states of selfish apathy, crawled endlessly through ash and fire, mindless and suffering. The Yugoloths processed these larvae in several ways. Some were transformed into lesser Yugoloths through dark rituals, joining the mercenary armies. Others were sold to night hags who used larvae in their own obscene crafts. Many were simply consumed, their essence providing power to Ultraloths and Arcanoloths who fed on spiritual energy. The larvae fields functioned as farms, factories, and feeding grounds simultaneously, maintained by Yugoloths who herded the larvae like grotesque livestock. The screaming in the fields never stopped, a constant background noise that characterized Gehenna as much as its volcanic activity. The internal politics of Yugoloth society revolved around advancement through excellence and betrayal. Every Yugoloth understood that demonstrating superior skill in warfare, contract negotiation, or arcane study could lead to transformation into a higher caste. A Metzaloth who distinguished itself in battle might be selected for transformation into a Nikoloth. An Arcanoloth whose research proved particularly valuable might ascend to Ultraloth status. These transformations were not guaranteed by performance alone, but required also political maneuvering and often the elimination of rivals who might compete for the same advancement. Yugoloth society thus maintained constant internal pressure, every member striving to prove superiority while undermining peers who pursued similar goals. This competition produced exceptional individuals while preventing unified action against Yugoloth leadership. The concept of Yugoloth honor deserves examination, for they possessed a code of conduct that outsiders often mistook for morality. Yugoloths honored contracts absolutely, fulfilling every obligation exactly as written regardless of personal cost. This reliability was not ethical behavior but brand management. Their entire economy depended on clients trusting that Yugoloth agreements would be executed precisely, and any Yugoloth who violated a contract faced immediate execution by its own kind. The Arcanoloths maintained enforcement bureaus specifically tasked with hunting down contract violators, and these bureaus showed no mercy. A Yugoloth who broke contract terms was killed publicly, its essence scattered, its name erased from all records. This harsh enforcement meant that Yugoloth contracts were paradoxically the most trustworthy agreements in the multiverse, more reliable than devil pacts or demon oaths, despite being offered by neutral evil creatures who cared nothing for truth or honor as abstract principles. The relationship between Yugoloths and mortal summoners developed into complex symbiosis. Mortal wizards and clerics could summon Yugoloths using specific rituals, binding them to temporary service. The Yugoloths accepted these summonings because they provided access to the material plane and opportunities to corrupt mortals for later soul harvesting. A Metzaloth summoned to fight in a mortal war might serve its summoner faithfully for the agreed duration, then return to Gehenna with intelligence about the mortal world, knowledge of summoning rituals to share with other Yugoloths, and sometimes souls of those killed in the service. Powerful mortal spellcasters occasionally negotiated long-term contracts with Yugoloths, agreements that spanned years or decades. These contracts often included provisions for Yugoloth agents to operate on the material plane, advancing Yugoloth interests while ostensibly serving their mortal employers. The most infamous mortal Yugoloth partnership involved the Archmage Shun IV of ancient Kalimshan, who contracted an entire army of Yugoloths to serve as his personal guard and enforcement arm. The Yugoloths fulfilled their contract terms for decades, crushing Shun's enemies and maintaining order through terror. When Shun finally died, his empire collapsed into civil war, and the Yugoloths calmly collected the souls of all combatants as payment for services rendered, a provision Shun had agreed to without fully understanding its implications. Thousands of souls flowed to Gehenna, processed into larvae and distributed across Yugoloth holdings. The incident became cautionary tale among mortal spellcasters about the dangers of long-term fiendish contracts, though many ignored the warning and repeated Shun's mistakes in subsequent generations. The transformation of Yugoloth lore through different editions of the game reflected changing philosophical approaches to evil and alignment. In the earliest presentations, Yugoloths appeared as straightforward neutral evil creatures, mercenaries notable primarily for their willingness to serve any master. The first monster manual entries described their basic forms and combat capabilities without extensive background. As the game's cosmology developed, particularly with the publication of the Planes of Conflict boxed set, Yugoloth lore expanded dramatically. They became architects of the Blood War, manipulators working behind the scenes of the multiverse's greatest conflict. Their origins as potential night hag creations emerged, along with detailed descriptions of their caste system and contract culture. The planescape setting in particular elevated Yugoloths to major players in lower planar politics, beings whose mercenary nature masked deeper manipulative tendencies. The transition to 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons brought Yugoloths into the core cosmology with renewed emphasis on their role as neutral evil exemplars. The Book of Vile Darkness and Fiendish Codex presented them as beings who embodied evil as transaction, contrasting their mercenary philosophy with devil tyranny and demon destruction. 4th edition radically reimagined the planes, and with them the nature of fiends. Yugoloths became refugees from a destroyed plane, survivors of a cosmic catastrophe who had spread across other realms. This revision, while controversial among longtime fans, emphasized Yugoloth adaptability and resilience. 5th edition returned to more traditional Yugoloth presentation, restoring their connection to the Grey Waste and Gehenna while maintaining their mercenary reputation. The Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes provided extensive Yugoloth lore, confirming their manipulation of the Blood War and their status as the multiverse's most reliable but dangerous mercenaries. The General of Gehenna experienced multiple incarnations across Yugoloth history. Anthraxus, though longest serving, eventually fell to an assassin whose identity remained uncertain, possibly another Ultraloth, possibly a disguised demon lord, possibly even an archdevil settling scores. His successor, an Ultraloth named Midianclarus, ruled for barely a century before dying in circumstances that suggested Yugoloth rivals rather than external enemies. The position changed hands 17 times across the millennia, each transition marked by violence and immediate policy shifts, as new generals implemented their visions for Yugoloth society. Some generals pursued aggressive expansion, launching campaigns to seize territory from demons and devils. Others focused on internal consolidation, strengthening Yugoloth hierarchies and standardizing contract practices. A few attempted to unite the Yugoloths into a force capable of conquering the entire lower planes, ambitions that invariably failed when other Yugoloths recognized that such unity threatened their individual advancement opportunities. The current Oinoloth in modern Dungeons & Dragons lore is Anthraxus, returned to power through means that remain unclear even to Yugoloth scholars. Whether he had survived his assassination and laid low for millennia, or whether he had been resurrected through magic or reincarnated through Yugoloth life cycles, no one knew with certainty. His second reign demonstrated the same paranoid competence that characterized his first, though he had adapted to changed planar circumstances. He recognized that the modern multiverse required Yugoloth evolution, that simply maintaining traditional mercenary services would leave Yugoloths behind as other powers developed new strategies and technologies. Under his leadership, the Yugoloths expanded into new markets: soul brokerage, planar transportation services, magical research for hire, and intelligence gathering. These enterprises diversified Yugoloth income streams while maintaining their core military contracting business. The establishment of the crawling city on the Grey Waste represented the most ambitious Yugoloth construction project in recorded history. This mobile metropolis, built on the backs of enslaved titans and powered by soul engines, moved across Oinos, devouring everything in its path. The crawling city served as Yugoloth factory, fortress, and trading hub, a place where contracts were negotiated, souls were processed, and armies were trained. Its mobile nature made it nearly impossible to assault effectively, as it simply relocated when threatened. The city's ruler, an Ultraloth named Serlik, governed independently of Anthraxis while maintaining formal allegiance to Kin Oin. This arrangement exemplified Yugoloth political structure: autonomous power centers that recognized central authority without being controlled by it, creating a distributed network more resilient than any centralized empire. The Yugoloths' relationship with the river Styx deserves particular attention, for they exploited this planar feature more effectively than any other fiends. The Styx flowed through multiple lower planes, its memory-destroying waters connecting Acheron, the Nine Hells, Gehenna, the Grey Waste, Carceri, and the Abyss. The Yugoloths maintained fleets of boats crewed by Hydroloths, operating ferry services that transported souls, armies, and goods across planar boundaries. They charged exorbitant fees for these services while guaranteeing safe passage, their intimate knowledge of the Styx's currents and hazards making them the most reliable guides available. The Yugoloths also harvested unique resources from the Styx: memory fragments that collected in certain eddies, soul residue that could be processed into magical components, and the water itself, which they sold to those seeking to erase specific memories or identities. The Hydroloths, who operated on the Styx, developed into a semi-autonomous Yugoloth subculture with their own traditions and hierarchies, though they remained subordinate to the Ultraloths who controlled the broader organization. The Night of Blades occurred when Yugoloth forces across the lower planes simultaneously turned on their employers in a coordinated betrayal that stunned devil and demon leadership alike. On a single night, Yugoloth armies serving both sides of the Blood War activated hidden clauses in their contracts, withdrew from active service, and in some cases actively sabotaged their former clients. The withdrawal shifted battle lines across a dozen planes, causing the collapse of multiple major campaigns and the destruction of several important fortresses. When the affected parties investigated, they discovered that all the activated contracts had been written by the same Arcanoloth centuries earlier, and all contained identical withdrawal clauses buried in complex legal language. The Arcanoloth in question, never identified publicly, had planted these clauses knowing they would eventually prove useful, and had waited patiently for the perfect moment to activate them all at once. The Night of Blades demonstrated Yugoloth long-term planning capabilities and reinforced the necessity of careful contract review when dealing with them. The Yugoloths responded to the spell plague with characteristic opportunism. When Mystra died and the weave collapsed, causing chaos across all planes, the Yugoloths weathered the storm better than most fiends because their magic relied less on the weave and more on inherent planar energy. They offered their services as guides and protectors to those attempting to navigate the transformed multiverse, charging premium rates for expertise in the new planar geography. The spell plague killed many creatures and destroyed numerous strongholds, creating power vacuums that Yugoloths moved quickly to fill. They claimed territories in the Grey Waste previously held by other fiends, expanded their operations on Gehenna, and established new bases in regions of the Abyss that had been altered beyond recognition. The chaos also provided unprecedented opportunities for soul harvesting, as the deaths caused by the spell plague sent millions of souls flooding through the plains, many of them disoriented and vulnerable to Yugoloth predation. The Sundering brought further changes to the planar landscape, and again the Yugoloths adapted faster than their competitors. The restoration of more traditional planar boundaries and the return of certain destroyed regions created both challenges and opportunities. The Yugoloths lost some territories gained during the spell plague, but reclaimed others that had been inaccessible for a century. They renegotiated contracts with devils and demons whose circumstances had changed dramatically, always ensuring that the new agreements favored Yugoloth interests. The Sundering also saw the emergence of new demon lords and archdevils, powers who had risen during the chaotic period and now sought to establish themselves. The Yugoloths offered their services to these rising powers, helping them secure territories and defeat rivals, always in exchange for long-term contracts that would bind these new lords to Yugoloth interests for centuries to come. The relationship between Yugoloths and other neutral evil creatures remained complex and often competitive. The Night Hags maintained their claimed status as Yugoloth creators, leveraging this supposed ancestry to demand preferential treatment in negotiations. The Yugoloths indulged this fiction when convenient, but never acknowledged it as truth, maintaining their mysterious origins as strategic advantage. The daemons of certain campaign settings occupied similar ecological niche to Yugoloths, and where these creatures overlapped, conflict was inevitable. The Yugoloths generally proved superior in direct confrontation due to better organization and more sophisticated tactics, but daemons possessed their own advantages in specific circumstances. The Demodans of Carceri competed with Yugoloths for control of that prison plane, leading to ongoing low-intensity conflict that neither side could definitively win. Yugoloth interaction with good-aligned creatures followed predictable patterns. The Yugoloths recognized that angels, archons, and other celestials represented existential threats to fiendish interests generally, but they also recognized opportunities in the eternal conflict between good and evil. Yugoloth intelligence networks gathered information about celestial activities, which they sold to devils and demons at appropriate prices. They occasionally accepted contracts from mortal servants of good who needed distasteful tasks completed without dirtying their own hands, though such arrangements required extraordinary payment to offset the risk of celestial retaliation. The Yugoloths maintained no permanent presence in the upper planes, as their very nature caused them damage in those realms, but they infiltrated the material plane extensively, establishing networks of mortal agents who could operate where Yugoloths themselves could not easily go. The Arcanoloths' pursuit of knowledge led them into dangerous territory repeatedly. They sought magical secrets that devils hoarded and demons destroyed, piecing together spell formulas and rituals from fragments scattered across the plains. This research produced innovations that changed Yugoloth capabilities fundamentally. They developed improved methods of planar travel, allowing Yugoloth forces to deploy more rapidly than ever before. They created new types of magical contracts that bound signatories more thoroughly while appearing less restrictive. They uncovered true names of powerful beings, knowledge they secured in the deepest vaults of the Tower Arcane, to be used only when the potential gain justified the risk of exposure. Some Arcanoloth research ventures ended in disaster, releasing plagues or summoning entities that destroyed entire Yugoloth strongholds before being contained. The survivors incorporated these failures into their knowledge base, learning from disaster and ensuring that the same mistakes were not repeated. The economy of Gehenna revolved around Yugoloth activities to such an extent that the plane itself seemed shaped by their presence. The volcanic activity that characterized Gehenna provided both hazard and resource, with Yugoloths mining unique minerals from the lava flows and building fortresses that channeled geothermal energy into defensive wards. The lavae fields sprawled across the slopes between volcanoes, vast farms that processed thousands of souls daily. Yugoloth smiths worked in forges heated by Gehenna's fires, crafting weapons and armor that could survive planar travel and withstand fiendish combat. The contracts that governed all this activity were stored in massive archives built into the mountains themselves, chambers where millions of agreements were preserved in conditions that prevented their destruction by fire, time, or theft. Access to these archives was restricted to authorized Arcanoloths, and security around them rivaled that of Kinoin itself. The role of Yugoloths in the modern blood war had evolved from simple mercenaries to power brokers and manipulators operating at the highest levels of fiendish politics. They still provided military services, deploying armies of Metzoloths and Yugoloths to battlefields across the lower plains, but these deployments represented only the visible portion of their activities. Behind the scenes, Yugoloths worked to ensure that the blood war continued in equilibrium, that neither devils nor demons gained permanent advantage, that the conflict remained profitable indefinitely. They leaked information to balance power, assassinated leaders who threatened to end stalemates, and introduced new weapons or tactics to whichever side was losing. This manipulation required extraordinary sophistication, as both devils and demons were themselves intelligent and suspicious of Yugoloth motives. The Yugoloths succeeded by maintaining absolute contract fidelity in their overt dealings, while conducting their covert manipulations through proxies and intermediaries who could not be traced to Yugoloth control. The Ultraloths who commanded Yugoloth armies understood warfare at a level that matched or exceeded the greatest devil generals and demon champions. They studied every blood war campaign, analyzed successes and failures with scientific precision, and incorporated lessons learned into training regimens for lesser Yugoloths. A Metzoloth army under Ultraloth command moved with machine precision, executing complex maneuvers that demon hordes could not match and maintaining discipline that impressed even devils. The Ultraloths themselves were devastating combatants, their forearms wielding weapons while simultaneously casting spells, their bodies protected by armor that incorporated both physical defense and magical wards. In personal combat, an Ultraloth could engage multiple opponents simultaneously, coordinating attacks and defenses with perfect timing. Their intelligence made them more dangerous than their physical capabilities alone suggested, as they analyzed opponent tactics in real time and adapted strategies mid-battle. The Yugoloths served as Yugoloth special forces, operating in small teams to accomplish objectives that required skill rather than mass. They conducted reconnaissance behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence that Arcanoloths analyzed to find exploitable weaknesses. They performed surgical strikes against high-value targets, assassinating enemy commanders or destroying critical infrastructure. They infiltrated enemy organizations, using magical disguises and false identities to gain positions of trust before executing sabotage missions. The Yugoloths took pride in their elite status, maintaining standards of excellence that made them the most expensive Yugoloth forces to contract, but also the most effective for specialized tasks. A Yugoloth team could accomplish in hours what a Metzoloth army might take weeks to achieve, though their high cost meant they were reserved for missions where precision mattered more than raw force. The Arcanoloth networks extended throughout the plains, connecting Yugoloth agents in a web of communication and coordination that gave them near-omniscient awareness of planar events. Every significant fortress hosted an Arcanoloth representative who reported to the Tower Arcane regularly. These representatives gathered information from local sources, observed political developments, and maintained the contracts that governed Yugoloth activities in their regions. The information flowed upward to senior Arcanoloths, who analyzed it for patterns and opportunities, producing intelligence reports that informed Yugoloth strategy. This network made it nearly impossible to surprise Yugoloths with major planar developments, as they typically learned of significant events before many of the directly involved parties had fully processed what had occurred. The network also served as early warning system for threats to Yugoloth interests, allowing rapid response to emerging problems. The slave trade represented a significant secondary Yugoloth enterprise. They captured creatures across the plains, selling them to whoever offered acceptable payment. Demons purchased slaves as cannon fodder or sacrifices. Devils bought slaves to serve in their hierarchies or to corrupt into eventual devil transformation. Mortal spellcasters contracted Yugoloths to kidnap specific individuals for ransom, revenge, or darker purposes. The Yugoloths operated this business with the same contractual precision they applied to military services, guaranteeing delivery of slaves in specified conditions by specified deadlines. They maintained holding facilities across multiple planes where slaves were processed and prepared for delivery, facilities guarded by Mesoloths and administered by Arcanoloths, who tracked inventory with meticulous accuracy. The suffering of these slaves concerned the Yugoloths not at all, except insofar as damaged goods might violate contract terms. The concept of Yugoloth weakness requires careful examination, for they possessed significant vulnerabilities despite their power and cunning. Their strict contract culture, while providing reliability that made them valuable, also created exploitability. A sufficiently clever negotiator could craft contract terms that trapped Yugoloths into unfavorable arrangements, though few possessed the legal acumen to outmaneuver an Arcanoloth in contract language. Their mercenary nature meant they could never inspire true loyalty or ideological commitment, limiting their ability to build lasting coalitions beyond temporary contract arrangements. Their neutral evil alignment prevented them from accessing certain types of magic that required ideological conviction, whether lawful or chaotic. Most significantly, their need to maintain reputation as reliable contractors created pressure to fulfill agreements, even when doing so proved costly or dangerous, as contract violation would damage the Yugoloth brand irreparably. The soul economy of the lower planes depended heavily on Yugoloth intermediation. Devils and demons both needed souls to fuel their hierarchies and increase their power, but direct soul acquisition required significant effort. The Yugoloths operated as soul brokers, purchasing souls from night hags, harvesting them from larvae fields, and collecting them from mortal contracts. They then resold these souls to whoever offered the best price, creating a market that spanned the entire lower planes. This intermediation allowed devils and demons to acquire souls more efficiently than through direct harvesting alone, while providing Yugoloths with steady income streams independent of military contracting. The soul market had its own complex economics, with prices fluctuating based on soul quality, alignment, and current supply and demand. Arcanoloths specialized in soul trading, maintaining detailed records of transactions and market trends, positioning themselves to profit from price movements and supply disruptions. The relationship between Yugoloths and the concepts of law and chaos deserves deeper exploration. Their neutral stance meant they were neither bound by law like devils, nor driven by chaos like demons, but this neutrality did not mean they existed in some philosophical middle ground. Rather, they simply did not care about the law-chaos axis at all, viewing it as an irrelevant philosophical distraction from the practical business of survival and profit. This indifference gave them flexibility that more ideologically committed fiends lacked. A Yugoloth could work within lawful systems when advantageous, crafting intricate contracts that exploited legal frameworks, or it could embrace chaos when disorder served its purposes, breaking established patterns to create confusion and opportunity. This flexibility made them unpredictable in ways that unsettled even devils and demons, for neither law nor chaos provided framework for understanding Yugoloth actions. One could only understand Yugoloths by recognizing that they acted purely from calculated self-interest, unrestrained by any philosophical commitment beyond the pragmatic recognition that maintaining contract reliability served their long-term prosperity. The Tower Arcane's architecture reflected impossible geometries that suggested the structure existed partially outside normal space-time. The tower appeared simultaneously in multiple locations, its different manifestations connected through spatial warps that allowed Arcanoloths to move between distant points instantaneously. The interior spaces exceeded the exterior dimensions by orders of magnitude, endless libraries and laboratories, and vaults that extended into extra-dimensional pockets. The oldest sections of the tower predated current Yugoloth memory, chambers sealed with wards that even the Arcanoloths could not bypass, containing knowledge or artifacts so dangerous or valuable that their creators had ensured they could never be accessed except under specific circumstances that might never occur. The tower grew continuously as Arcanoloths added new sections to house expanding collections, each edition incorporating the latest magical protections and architectural innovations. Some theorists suggested the Tower Arcane was itself a living entity, a being that had bonded with the Yugoloths in symbiotic relationship, though the Yugoloths neither confirmed nor denied this possibility. The Yugoloth approach to time differed from mortal perspectives in fundamental ways. They thought in centuries and millennia rather than years and decades, patient enough to wait generations for plans to mature. An Yugoloth might initiate a scheme knowing that it would not bear fruit for 1,000 years, content to take incremental steps across the centuries, while other concerns occupied immediate attention. This long-term thinking gave Yugoloths strategic advantages in conflicts with shorter-lived creatures, though it occasionally led to problems when circumstances changed faster than their slow-moving plans could adapt. The Ultraloths combined this patience with military pragmatism, recognizing that tactical situations required immediate response, even as strategic goals operated on much longer timelines. The tension between tactical flexibility and strategic patience characterized Yugoloth command culture, with successful leaders balancing both considerations effectively. The Mesoloths represented Yugoloth infantry at its most refined, soldiers whose every action had been drilled into them through centuries of training. They fought in perfect formation, each individual supporting its neighbors, creating defensive walls of chitinous armor and offensive waves of trident strikes that could overwhelm numerically superior forces through superior coordination. The Mesoloths felt no fear, possessed no personal ambition that might lead them to break formation, and executed orders with absolute obedience. This made them ideal soldiers for prolonged campaigns where discipline mattered more than innovation. However, their lack of initiative meant they required constant command oversight, and Mesoloth armies cut off from Ultraloth leadership could be outmaneuvered by more flexible opponents. The Mesoloths themselves accepted their role without apparent resentment, either incapable of desiring advancement or so thoroughly indoctrinated that desire had been suppressed entirely. The Yugoloths occupied the lowest tier of common Yugoloth hierarchy, creatures whose insectoid forms were larger and more bestial than those of Mesoloths. They served as beasts of burden, hauling supplies for Yugoloth armies and operating siege equipment too heavy for lesser fiends to manage. In battle, they functioned as living battering rams, their massive mandibles crushing fortifications and their acidic secretions dissolving obstacles. The Yugoloths possessed limited intelligence compared to higher Yugoloth castes, though even they exceeded the cognitive capabilities of many lesser fiends. They could not speak, but understood commands in multiple languages, responding with efficient brutality to directions from Ultraloth overseers. Some Yugoloths showed signs of greater intelligence than typical for their caste, individuals who might eventually be selected for transformation into Mesoloths if they demonstrated sufficient value through exceptional service. The Hydroloths adapted to aquatic environments so thoroughly that they could not survive long on dry land without magical support. They crewed Yugoloth vessels on the river Styx and other planar waterways, their fins and gills allowing them to navigate waters that would destroy most creatures. The Hydroloths developed unique cultural elements separate from land-based Yugoloths, traditions and practices shaped by their environment. They worshipped the Styx itself in something approaching religious devotion, believing the river to be a living entity that granted them favor in exchange for service. This belief was unique among Yugoloths, who typically scorned religious faith as weakness, but the Ultraloths tolerated Hydroloth spirituality because it made them more effective in their roles. The Hydroloths occasionally discovered treasures in the Styx's depths, artifacts lost by travelers or discarded by ancient civilizations, which they traded to Arcanoloths for transformation privileges or other rewards. The question of Yugoloth emotion and psychology revealed creatures who experienced feelings differently than mortals, but were not emotionless automata. They felt satisfaction at successful manipulations, frustration at setbacks, and something approaching pride in professional excellence. What they lacked was capacity for emotional attachment unconnected to self-interest. A Yugoloth could not love in any meaningful sense, could not form friendships based on genuine affection, could not feel loyalty except as calculated strategy. This emotional poverty manifested in their relationships with each other, which were entirely transactional. Yugoloths cooperated when cooperation advanced mutual interests and betrayed each other the moment betrayal offered better returns. They experienced no guilt at betrayal, no sorrow at colleague deaths, no joy at shared triumphs beyond personal benefit calculations. This made them profoundly alien to mortals despite their intelligence and communicative ability, creatures who could imitate emotional engagement perfectly while feeling nothing genuine beneath the performance. The fall of Kin Oin would represent catastrophe for Yugoloth civilization, though they had prepared extensively for that possibility. The fortress had been besieged multiple times across the millennia, attacked by demon hordes, devil armies, and various coalitions seeking to destroy Yugoloth power. It had never fallen, its defenses proving sufficient to repel all assaults. However, the Yugoloths recognized that eternal victory was impossible, that eventually some attack might succeed through numerical superiority, tactical brilliance, or unforeseen circumstance. They had therefore established contingency plans for command succession and organizational continuity should Kinoin be destroyed. Multiple Ultraloths possessed sealed orders to be opened only upon the fortress's fall, orders that would designate new command centers and establish interim leadership. The Arcanoloths had secured copies of all critical contracts and records in hidden vaults across multiple planes, ensuring that Yugoloth operations could continue even if Kinoin's archives were lost. These preparations meant that while Kinoin's destruction would undoubtedly wound Yugoloth power, it would not break them. The Yugoloth attitude toward other evil creatures reflected their mercenary pragmatism. They viewed devils as valuable customers whose obsession with law made them predictable and therefore reliable business partners. The devil's habit of honoring agreements aligned with Yugoloth interests, though devil attempts to cheat through creative contract interpretation provided ongoing challenges. Demons represented more problematic clients, as their chaotic nature made them unpredictable and sometimes led them to violate contracts impulsively. The Yugoloths had developed strategies for managing demon unreliability, including insurance clauses in contracts and immediate overwhelming retaliation against contract violators to discourage future violations. They viewed undead as inferior beings, animated shells without the intellect for complex interaction, though powerful undead like liches occasionally made acceptable clients. Evil dragons earned Yugoloth respect as fellow intelligent evil beings who understood the value of clear agreements, though their pride sometimes made negotiations difficult. The material components required for Yugoloth summoning rituals reflected their nature and planar origins. Summoners needed volcanic glass from Gehenna's slopes, ash from the Grey Waste, and often soul fragments or larvae specimens. The rituals themselves required precise timing, typically performed during planar conjunctions when the barriers between planes thinned temporarily. The summoning circle needed inscriptions in multiple infernal languages, each word positioned perfectly to create the mathematical precision necessary for planar breach. Mistakes in summoning rituals could prove fatal, either trapping the summoner in unbreakable contracts or allowing the summoned Yugoloth more freedom than intended. The Yugoloths deliberately spread imperfect summoning rituals among mortal spellcasters, rituals that contained subtle flaws creating loopholes for Yugoloth exploitation. A summoner using such rituals might believe they had bound a Yugoloth securely, only to discover too late that the binding contained gaps through which the fiend could act against the summoner's interests while technically fulfilling contract terms. The evolution of Yugoloth military doctrine across the millennia showed continuous refinement and adaptation. Early Yugoloth tactics relied heavily on massed Mesoloth formations, overwhelming opponents through disciplined coordination. As enemies adapted to these tactics, the Yugoloths incorporated more specialized forces, using Nikoloths for flanking maneuvers and Arcanoloths for magical support. They developed combined arms approaches that integrated infantry, aerial forces, and spellcasters into unified battle plans. Modern Yugoloth tactics emphasized information superiority and strategic deception, using intelligence gathered by Arcanoloth networks to identify enemy weaknesses and employing feints and false information to create confusion. They mastered the art of fighting to contract terms rather than to victory, inflicting precise amounts of damage or achieving specific objectives defined by agreement rather than pursuing total destruction. This approach maximized efficiency while minimizing Yugoloth casualties, preserving their forces for future contracts. The relationship between individual Yugoloth ambition and collective organization created constant tension. Every Yugoloth pursued personal advancement, seeking to rise through the castes to achieve Ultraloth status and possibly challenge for the position of Oinoloth. This ambition drove Yugoloths to excellence, as only the most capable individuals advanced. However, unchecked ambition threatened organizational cohesion, as Yugoloths pursuing personal goals might undermine collective interests. The Ultraloths managed this tension through careful manipulation of incentive structures, ensuring that individual advancement required demonstrated contribution to Yugoloth prosperity generally. An Arcanoloth who distinguished itself through research that benefited all Yugoloths might be rewarded with Ultraloth transformation, while one who pursued solely selfish goals at collective expense would find advancement impossible regardless of personal capability. This system channeled ambition toward productive ends while preventing the self-destructive infighting that plagued demon society. The impact of Yugoloth activity on the broader multiverse extended far beyond the lower planes. Their manipulation of the Blood War prevented either side from achieving victory, which in turn prevented the winners from turning their attention to other planes. If devils conquered the abyss, they might next assault the celestial planes with overwhelming force, potentially tipping the cosmic balance toward evil. If demons destroyed the Nine Hells, their unconstrained chaos might spread throughout the multiverse, unraveling reality itself. The Yugoloths maintained the Blood War's equilibrium not from altruism but from recognition that a stable, profitable conflict served their interests better than cosmic transformation. This accidental cosmic service meant that Yugoloths, despite being thoroughly evil, performed a stabilizing function that benefited even good-aligned planes indirectly. The Celestials recognized this dynamic and had occasionally considered whether eliminating Yugoloths would serve the greater good, but concluded that the risk of destabilizing the Blood War outweighed the benefit of removing one neutral evil faction. The Yugoloths who achieved legendary status among their kind included figures whose accomplishments shaped Yugoloth history. Anthraxus the Oinoloth remained most famous, his multiple reigns demonstrating unmatched political and military skill. The Arcanoloth Charon, ferryman of the River Styx, achieved near-mythic status through his ancient compact that gave him special privileges operating on that waterway. Charon was said to be among the oldest Yugoloths, perhaps an original member of the race, though he refused to confirm or deny this heritage. The Ultraloth Bubonics earned renown through development of the Red Death Plague, his name becoming synonymous with Yugoloth biological warfare research. The Arcanoloth Zenghara achieved fame through negotiating the Treaty of Perpetual Conflict, an agreement between multiple demon lords and archdevils that standardized certain Blood War practices and explicitly recognized Yugoloth neutrality, granting them protected status that made attacking Yugoloth forces between contracts a violation of lower planar law. The commercial infrastructure supporting Yugoloth operations included extensive support systems invisible to most observers. Yugoloth accountants, usually Arcanoloths specializing in financial management, tracked every transaction across their entire civilization, maintaining records of contracts, payments, debts, and obligations. These financial records occupied entire sections of the Tower Arcane, scrolls and ledgers that detailed millennia of commercial activity. Yugoloth logistics specialists managed supply chains that moved weapons, armor, food, and other necessities across multiple planes, ensuring Yugoloth armies remained equipped regardless of deployment location. Yugoloth scholars studied tactics, magic, history, and countless other disciplines, their research informing Yugoloth strategy and operations. These support specialists rarely saw combat, but were essential to Yugoloth effectiveness, providing the intellectual and organizational foundation that made Yugoloth armies the multiverse's most professional military forces. The final great mystery of Yugoloth civilization concerned their ultimate goal. They accumulated wealth, power, and knowledge with relentless focus, but toward what end? Unlike devils who served cosmic law or demons who embodied destruction, Yugoloths appeared to pursue profit and power as ends in themselves rather than means to larger purpose. Some scholars theorized that Yugoloths sought to achieve such dominance over the blood war that they could dictate terms to both sides, essentially controlling the lower planes through economic leverage. Others suggested that Yugoloth accumulation of wealth and knowledge was preparation for some future action, a plan so long-term that even ancient Yugoloths represented only early stages of its execution. The Yugoloths themselves never revealed their ultimate objectives, if indeed such objectives existed. Perhaps they truly were creatures of pure mercenary instinct, existing to profit from conflict without deeper meaning or purpose, evil distilled to its most transactional essence. The modern Yugoloth presence across the multiverse continues patterns established millennia ago. They maintain their fortress networks across Gehenna and the Grey Waste. They operate their ferry services on the River Styx. They negotiate contracts with devils and demons, providing mercenary forces to both sides of the blood war. They harvest souls and process larvae. They conduct arcane research in the Tower Arcane. They scheme and betray, and occasionally honor agreements with perfect fidelity. The rise and fall of mortal civilizations means little to them except as opportunities for soul acquisition and summoning contracts. The conflicts of gods rarely touch their interests, except when divine warfare creates market conditions favorable to Yugoloth enterprises. They endure through cosmic catastrophes, adapt to planar transformations, and emerge from every crisis with their essential nature unchanged. Professional, reliable, utterly evil mercenaries who understand that conflict properly managed need never end, and that those who broker endless war need never lack employment. The Yugoloths represent neutral evil in its most crystallized form, beings who have stripped away all philosophical pretense to reveal evil as simple self-interest pursued without restraint or remorse. They possess none of the devil's conviction that tyranny serves cosmic order, none of the demon's belief that destruction is ecstatic liberation. They simply recognize that the multiverse offers opportunities for profit to those ruthless enough to seize them and disciplined enough to maintain the reputation necessary for continued operation. Their contracts are simultaneously their greatest strength and their defining limitation, providing reliability that makes them valuable while constraining their actions within negotiated boundaries. They are creatures who could not exist in a universe at peace, who require conflict and suffering to maintain their purpose, and who therefore work tirelessly to ensure that the multiverse never lacks for war, betrayal, and damnation. In this they have succeeded beyond measure, for the blood war continues, Yugoloth coffers fill with souls and treasure, and Kinoin stands eternal on the slopes of Gehenna, black tower against burning sky, monument to profitable evil and the understanding that some wars are meant never to end.